Grimsby, Ontario is a town of 26,000 nestled between Lake Ontario and the majestic Niagara Escarpment. At the water's edge is their War of 1812 bicentennial Peace Garden, an historical site dedicated to the American troops' retreat from the Battle of Stony Creek and the British attack at 40 Mile Creek that chased the American forces to Fort George. Today is the 200th anniversary of that famous day in history. Over 3,000 people have turned out to see British and American reenactors prepare to do battle. Welcome to the site of the action at the 40. The War of 1812 was declared by the United States against Britain on June 18, 1812, and Upper Canada, what's now Ontario, would be the major battleground. The Americans declared war on Britain because Britain was stopping American ships on the high seas to prevent them from taking supplies to Napoleon. Britain was in a world war against Napoleon, a death struggle against Napoleon, when the War of 1812 was declared. The population of the United States was 14 times that of British North America, about the same ratio as it is today. And yet, it was a combination of a professional British Army and Navy, provincial volunteers, and strong alliances with First Nations that ensured that they were able to successfully defend Upper Canada and ensure that what's now Ontario did not become another state in the Union. So with the American campaign, part of it was to capture the Niagara Peninsula and use it as a springboard for the conquest of the province. So Yeo advanced with the men of the King's Eighth, the reinforcements for Burlington Heights, but before doing so, when coming from the mouth of the Niagara River, a couple of his ships saw a lot of smoke arising from this area. The smoke was from the campfires of 4,000 Americans camped here. Well, Morgan Lewis was no stoop. He'd already had his artillery with his troops set up a gun position on the banks and start heating cannonballs up red hot. The British gunboats opened fire on the American encampment and quickly put the American cannons out of position. The American didn't surrender, though. He took off as quickly as he could, left all his tents and his equipment and supplies and so on here, and off he went back to Fort George. He left muskets here, he left food supplies, medical supplies, and so on. The British fleet then proceeds to send the reinforcements to Burlington Heights, while some of the gunboats of the British fleet were towed close to shore and started bombarding the American camp. Grimsby's slogan is friendly by nature, but 200 years ago, it wasn't so friendly. Meanwhile, the American artillery that is prepared hotshot, red hotshot, is going to try and help their comrades by firing at the British vessels. Hopefully they can put them on fire. Oh, I see that that supply party is in real trouble. They've been caught by the fellows from the British Indian Department and their First Nations allies. British infantry and sailors on board firing musketry back at the Americans, keeping them pegged down, because one cannonball hitting one of those boats, and that would be the end of that boat. Luckily, the Americans are firing high. You notice how the British have been able to land a Royal Navy landing party with some ease to outflank the Americans. And the American artillery aren't aware that they've become that close to shore. Finally, the Americans have assembled and they're driving off the British Indian Department of First Nations fellas. Meanwhile, at the far end of the field, men of the 2nd Lincoln Militia have mustered in the first time since the capture of Fort George. Now, to load these cannons, you'll notice they're one shot at a time. After each shot, the cannon has to be sponged out with a lamb's wool sponge, like a big Q-tip. So the gun barrel had to be swabbed carefully, and then the cartridge is brought up. The cartridge was the right amount of gunpowder, so the cartridge was pushed down the barrel and rammed to the bottom. The main British ships are about 2 miles offshore and they're hidden in the mist right now. But the American artillery figure if they fire at those ships, they'll prevent any more of the British Royal Navy boats from getting too close to shore. and provide some protection. Oh, here come the British regulars. The muskets are slow to load. You can fire about 3 shots a minute, and if you hit someone at 100 yards, then that person you hit was indeed unlucky. Because it wasn't your skill that caused you to hit them at 100 yards, it was nothing but luck. They were terribly inaccurate. So the best way to use them was normally to mass your men together in a solid line and all fire at once. Regulars were extremely well trained, but by 1813, many of the American forces were becoming well trained as well to fight using the same tactics as the British. Well, the light infantry fight spread apart and kneeling down firing to try and keep the British from forming up properly. The American line forms to fire volleys at the British. The entire musket consisted of 3 pieces. There was a lock, stock, and barrel. The Americans are frightened stiff of the fact that they are First Nations allies with the British. So soldiers who had fought the Battle of Stony Creek only 2 days ago are exhausted. They've lost a battle at Stony Creek. They've been forced to march all the way back here from Stony Creek to stop at the 40, only to be harassed by the Royal Navy, by First Nations in the woods, trying one last desperate attack towards the British with the bayonet. Oh, a devastating volley at close range. The Americans will try to bring off their wounded. See, the Americans are using their gun limber to remove one of the wounded. He must be an important man. For every man killed outright in battle, 4 died of their wounds. Oh, it looks like the American commander has wisely decided that they've had enough for the day. Some of the local women and children come out to the battlefield because some of them will have relatives. So the reenactors are fixing their bayonets to be in parade mode, and they'll be marching past. So men of the U.S. Infantry and the Canadian Volunteers helping them out today. Men of the U.S. Artillery Regiment and sailors representing the U.S. Navy. Men representing the Royal Newfoundland Regiment of Fencible Infantry, Royal Navy Landing Party, 2nd Lincoln Militia, British Indian Department, and Haudenosaunee Allies. Thank you very much for being with us. You've been a great audience. Thank you.